Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the Kickstarter and GameFound campaigns launching this week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But if you want to see further into the future, definitely go check out Board Game Co's channel because he posts a video near the end of each month going over the next month and letting you know of all the big campaigns that you can expect. He also puts out a ton of other really useful videos and I'll leave a link to his channel right up here. I usually like to start these videos going into some of the new discoveries and announcements that I just found out about over the past week, but I don't have anything too crazy or big to announce, so we can just get straight into the Kickstarter, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on April 25th, and this one's called IT Startup Office Lockdown. And this plays 1 to 6 players and takes about 10 to 60 minutes to play. And this is the standalone expansion to the game IT Startup, which is a tongue-in-cheek game about running your own tech startup company. And players are going to be managing their team of developers, raising their skills, providing them with coffee, and trying to avoid burnout in order to complete a number of project points first, in order to complete an overall project before your competitors. And the game's length can be adjusted by just modifying the number of project points that are required to win the game, and it's recommended that you either do 32, 64, or 128. And players will be starting the game with a hand of 5 cards and a number of resources. And each turn, players are going to be drawing another card into their hand and then also getting additional resources that are going to increase with each passing round, making the rounds ramp up faster and faster as you get into the later stages of the game. On your turn, you'll be able to perform as many actions as you want to or that you're able to, and one of those actions is to pay the cost at the top of the card in the form of resources in order to put that card out into play. And depending on the card that you're putting into play, it might have a different cost or a different number of project points that it can accomplish each turn. Because at the end of your turn, you're going to be adding up all the project points from your different team members, and then that's going to be contributing to your overall project completion and helping you work towards winning the game. But also at the end of each round, every card you have in play will also get a burnout token, and if cards get too many of these tokens, then they will be removed from play and discarded. But players can do a lot to manipulate this because the different cards that you put out might add or remove different burnout tokens from the cards that you have in play or that the cards your opponents have in play. And there's also all sorts of skill cards that players can use to modify all aspects of the game and even do things like poach different developers from your opponents. Players can also upgrade their team members with different knowledge cards, which can have different effects but can also increase the overall project point output. And of course, all these cards are going to have all sorts of tech references, like different packages or libraries that you might use. But then this specific version is going to have also all sorts of references to being locked down and working from home, and all the great things that come along with that. And since this is a standalone expansion, that means that you can go ahead and just get this and play just this version of the game, but it can also be mixed with the original if you want to have more variety in the cards that you might draw. And as always, if this is one that you are interested in, I have links to this campaign and all the rest in the description below. Launching on April 26th, we have Moogh, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 15 to 35 minutes to play. And this is a semi-cooperative game where players are working together to try to take out a woolly mammoth or some other beast, but they're also trying to inflict the most damage and gain the most savage points so that they win the game. And the reason that this is a semi-cooperative game is because the beast will fight back, so you're going to need the help of everyone else to try and take this beast down, because if you are unable to kill any of the beasts, or if all the cavemen are killed before you're able to do so, then all players lose the game. And the way that this works is that each caveman's going to have a meeple out on the board as well as their own action card, and each action card is going to have an injured side and an uninjured side, and if you get injured twice, then you are out of the game. And you're going to be able to select different beasts, but the beast will also have a card of its own, and that's going to dictate the sort of actions that it's going to be performing, as well as different movements it might make depending on the dice rolling and depending on what the other players do. But the game plays over 3 phases. The first phase is the prep phase, where you're going to be doing a bit of reset and cleanup from the previous round, but then you're going to be rolling a die and then increasing or reducing the rage of whatever beasts are out on the board depending on that dice roll. And the rage comes into effect when it's that beast's turn because it will be able to take more actions the higher its rage is. But after the prep phase, we have the action selection phase, and this is where each player is going to be planning their actions, and they'll be able to do this by placing a marker in between 2 actions on their action card, and then that will allow them to play those 2 actions if they want to on the next phase. And you can never leave the marker where it is, you always have to move it to another branch on your action card. And the neat thing about this is that each caveman's card is a little bit different, so that you're going to have some different actions and different choices depending on the caveman that you play from game to game. And in the team version, you'll even be able to mix and match different cavemen together to create a different combo of actions that are available to you and your team. And then the third phase is the resolution phase, and this is where players will actually be able to perform the actions that they selected in the previous phase, and this is going to happen in turn order, which is going to be alternating after each round. But basically, players are going to be trying to perform whatever actions they can to move in, inflict damage on the beast from a safe distance or from a safe location, while trying to also make sure that they're not putting their teammates in danger, but then that they are possibly putting their opponents in danger if they feel like it. It's semi-cooperative. But you'll be able to do different things like move around, climb onto the beast, perform all sorts of different types of attacks. You can taunt, scare, or sedate the beasts, set traps, heal, gain tokens that can be spent to reroll dice later, or use an idea card which will allow you to perform a special action. Some of these actions will also require you to perform a sort of skill check by doing some dice rolling, and some of the actions can also increase or decrease the rage of the beast. And the beast will react to certain actions that the players perform, turning towards whichever caveman is the closest anytime it's attacked, and certain parts of the beast are more dangerous to be around, like the mammoth's tusks, than other areas of the beast where you might be a little bit more protected until you try to hit it and it turns towards you. Different squares on the board will also feature some different types of terrain, and these can have different effects on the players as well as the beast, and you might be able to use certain areas for cover, or you might want to stay out of other certain areas. And as part of the resolution phase, the beast also plays a part in the player order. So as you're resolving each player's action, you're going to eventually get to the beast, and then you're going to have to resolve its action. And the way that works is that you're going to have a track here that has a number of actions in order, and you're going to be moving a token down that track, performing the next action that the token moves on to. The thing you have to watch out about here is that the number of times that token is going to move on the beast's turn is completely dependent on the beast's rage. So if it is a higher rage value, that token is going to move more times, and that beast is going to perform more actions in a single turn. And the game ends when the beast is killed, and in that case, the team that inflicted the most savage points is going to win the game. But if there's only one team left and no beast was killed, then all players lose the game. And this one's going to be launching on GameFound, so if you are interested in this one, I have a link below, and you can follow along to get notified. And launching on April 26th, we have Anunnaki, the Dawn of the Gods, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play. And one thing that I think is worth mentioning is this one is being co-designed by Simone Luciani, who has designed one of my favorite Euro games of all time, which is Tolkien, the Mayan Calendar, but he also co-designed like 4 other games that are in the top 100 on Board Game Geek, which is a pretty incredible feat. This guy really knows what he's doing, so I think that can give you a lot of confidence in this game, or at least give you a good reason to check it out. And this is a low-luck 4X Eurogame hybrid that's set in an ancient dystopian past, where mythology and science fiction have come together to create a world where portals have opened up, granting access to interstellar travel. Each player is going to be representing their own house as they travel to these different planets, and traveling from planet to planet can be pretty impressive, especially in an ancient past, and players are taking full advantage of this because you're actually going to be posing as gods to the inhabitants of these planets as you compete to build bases, recruit troops, develop new technologies, defeat local dominions that might push back against you as well as the other players, and take planets for all the resources before moving on to the next one. Absolutely savage. But the different actions that the players can perform will provide a certain number of immediate victory points, but there's also some random endgame goals that are drawn at the start of the game that are going to provide some variable ways to earn victory points that are earned at the end of the game. And a really neat thing about the way the action selection works in this game is that you're going to have all sorts of action paths on your board, and you're going to get a really powerful bonus if you're able to perform the actions by following one of those paths in sequential order. But that does come at a cost of restricting you to that path and doing every action in that order, which isn't always the most beneficial. So instead, you can also jump freely from action to action. You're just going to be foregoing a really powerful bonus that might be worth thinking about before you jump to your next action. And of course, the player with the most victory points at the end of the game is going to win the game, and I have links to this campaign in the description below. Also launching on April 26th, we have Dunhuang, Pearl on the Silk Road, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 40 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a Euro game that uses worker placement, and players will be different landlords set in China where they're trying to complete different achievements in the form of different types of artisan trades. The game comes with 12 different achievement packs, and players will choose 3 of those to play in the game, and that's going to add a lot of variability from game to game depending on how you decide to mix those in. And at the start of the game, each player is going to get their own player board with a few dice, a few resources, and 3 different workers that they'll be able to issue out on the main board. And there's also 3 areas on your player board where you'll be able to hire different characters that will give you some special abilities and kind of upgrade your own personal player board. And you'll be able to keep those for a portion of time until you spend the resources beneath them. Then you'll have to discard that card, which also gets you a bonus, but also frees up space to hire a different character. And the main board has 12 different basic action spaces where players can do simple things like gain money, upgrade their resources into actual products, perform quests to earn different resources or benefits, or trade products to move up an achievement track. And the row in the middle of the board will have the different characters that you're going to be able to recruit onto your board. But the action spots that I think are the most interesting are these action tiles, because players will each draft a tile at the start of the game, but you can purchase them by spending resources to gain more tiles that you can then put out on the board. And for each tile that you put out on the board, you're going to be able to put your die beside it. But then anytime a player uses that action tile for an action space, they're going to get whatever reward it offers, but then that die is going to get moved down 1 pip, and once it reaches 0, that tile is going to get discarded from the board, but then you'll get some special bonuses as well. Rounds play where players are going to be putting out 1 worker at a time until everyone has put out all their workers. And then at that point, you do a little bit of cleanup and take your workers back, and then the rounds continue like that until the end of the game, and then the player with the most victory points wins the game. And launching on April 26th, we have Cytress, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 40 to 100 minutes to play. And this is a game all about engine building and area control. And the way this game works is that players are each going to be controlling their own asymmetrical character, and the way that they are asymmetrical is the way that they generate resources. There's a few different types of resources that you can generate in the game, and each player is going to be starting with a certain amount that they are going to generate depending on different in-game actions or depending on which phase is currently happening within the game's round. Players are going to be starting with some sort of combination, but then they'll be able to add cards to their player board in those 4 different areas in order to extend those areas and increase the amount of resources that they'll gain anytime any one of those areas is triggered. And the game plays over a series of rounds, and there's 4 phases for each round. And the first one is the generate resources phase, where players are going to generate resources depending on how they've structured their player board so far. And the play area is going to be set up with a number of different districts, each with their own set of actions, and performing actions in those different areas may be one of the triggers for generating some of the resources on your player board. But then there's also this area in the middle where players will be competing for area control and to build different structures for victory points. And then the area in the back has this really neat vertical board where players will be able to get their cubes out on the board and be able to upgrade those cubes into the higher levels in order to earn more victory points at the end of the game. But the second phase is the leader placement, where players will be able to place one of their leaders out in the different action spaces on the districts. Usually that amounts to generating more resources. After that, players will be taking turns putting out their regular workers, and that will allow players to gain more cards to add to their player board, or to put different cubes out on the main area in the middle where they can do area control. Or instead, they can use an action to spend the resources that they've generated so far in order to build different structures, and the more resources that you're able to contribute to your structure, the higher it will be, and that will earn you more victory points at the end of the game. This is also the way you'll be able to get those cubes out on that vertical board. And then the fourth phase is simply to take all your workers back, and then the next round will continue. The game ends once all the structures have been spent, and players will gain points from the structures that they've built, the areas that they have influence on, and the set collection for different icons on the different cards. Also launching on April 26th, we have the Artemis Project Satellites and Commanders, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 75 minutes to play, and this is an expansion for the game, the Artemis Project. And this is a Euro game where you're going to be putting out dice workers in order to take your actions, and the way that this game works is that each round you're going to be drawing an event card, and the event card's going to specify a location, and the way that this comes into play is that you're going to be putting that event marker out on whichever location on the board that the card specifies, and then later in the round you're going to be resolving those action spaces in sequential order, and then whenever that action space with the event marker gets triggered, that event is going to occur and affect whatever players meet the criteria of that card. The players are each going to have their own player board to keep track of their resources and any upgrades, as well as their worker dice. Each round, all players will roll their dice, and then they're going to take turns putting one die out on the board at a time. And there's a few different areas on the board where players can put their dice, and I think the thing that makes this game so good is the really clever way that the dice worker placement works. Because any place that grants resources, you're going to get resources equal to the number of pips on your die, but the dice with the lower value are going to get resolved first, and there's only a limited amount of resources for each round. So you could possibly get more resources by playing a higher die, but you're also taking a higher risk because everyone else will get their resources first, and there might not be anything left by the time it gets to you. And I should probably mention the theme of this game because this one takes place on one of the moons of Jupiter, where players are mining for resources and developing colonies with limited supplies and harsh conditions. There's also some action spaces on the board that work a little bit more traditionally, but then there's also going to be some different tiles that will get mixed into the game on the side of the board, and these will vary in the order that they come out from game to game. There's expedition cards where players can actually put multiple of their dice, and the reason for that is because players are trying to have the highest overall value because there's 2 actions per card, and whoever has the highest value is going to get first choice of those actions, and whoever has second is going to get the second action, and anyone below that doesn't get to use the action at all. There's also building cards that can grant players victory points as well as permanent special abilities, and in order to put your dice on those, you're trying to get the highest value, but you want to have as low a value as possible because the value of your die is essentially acting as your bid. So you want to put a value there that no one else is going to outbid you on, but you also don't want to bid too high because you're actually going to have to pay that amount in resources, and a higher value means that you're paying more for that building card. And I don't need to mention that the artwork for this one is incredible. But the 2 expansions that are going to be introduced in this campaign are going to be adding 2 major ways to change up the game. The first one is the Satellites expansion, which is going to offer some off-board locations that players can access in order to modify the action spaces on the main board. And then there's the Commander expansion, which is going to introduce a type of colonist that players can use to their advantage to upgrade or modify their dice or assist in endgame scoring. This is definitely one worth checking out, and it is a game that already has a ton of reviews and content on it already, and you can go out and play it yourself. All I hear is good things about this game, and I think it's a ton of fun as well. And of course, there's links in the description below. And launching on April 26th, we have an expansion to the game Waste Nights, and this one's called Beyond the Horizon. And if you haven't played the original game, it's a post-apocalyptic game of adventure and survival set in Australia, and you can play it either cooperatively or competitively through different scenarios, and it uses dice rolling for combat. And the way this game works is that on a turn, you will have both a character and a vehicle, each with their own unique skills, and the different resources you're going to be spending are ammo, medicine, and fuel. And on a player's turn, they're going to be performing 2 actions from a subset of actions, and some of the actions you can perform are to move around the board, set up a camp to heal your character, or if you are on a city tile, you can perform some different city actions, which can be to trade, repair your vehicle, or also heal your character there. Players can also play the Explore action to draw an Explore card and gain the rewards that come along with that, or they can play a Plot action to interact with the scenario that the players are playing and draw a card for an event and reward and possibly a battle. This new expansion is going to allow players to leave the main continent and to visit new areas of the world like Tasmania, Solomon Islands, and New Zealand that have all been altered by the apocalypse. Along the way, players will be able to choose their ship, battle deadly sea monsters, and experience strange weather. The new freshwater resource has been added to the game, and this is going to make the game even more realistic and challenging both for seafarers and content dwellers. The expansion is also going to introduce a bunch of new knights with unique abilities that players can play as, and it will also allow players to uncover answers to the mysteries of the apocalyptic world. Also launching on April 26th, we have Spirit Duels, and this plays 2 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. And this is a competitive card game, but this is not a collectibles card game. So you're going to get all the cards that you need in the base box, and players are going to be going head to head, choosing different subsets of these cards, and then trying to defeat their opponents. Players are going to be drafting different elemental classes at the start of the game, and then you're going to be using those classes to craft your team of creatures. And these spirit creatures of different elemental classes are going to have strengths and weaknesses towards the other elements. After players have shuffled all their cards together, they're going to draw a hand, and then they're going to be taking turns performing a single action. And some of the actions that can be done is to play a card, which means just putting that card into play. Or instead, you can choose to activate a card that you already have in play, and when you do that, you're going to roll the dice associated with it. And those dice can be rolled for a few different purposes, which I'll get back to in a second. But the thing that I think is really interesting about this is that those dice don't get resolved until your following turn, which means that your opponent's going to get a turn first. So your opponent's going to have a good idea of what possibilities will happen on your next turn, and this will give them a chance to respond if they want to, and potentially modify the outcome of your roll depending on the cards that they play and the abilities that they activate. Because when you do roll your dice, there's actually a few options you have. You can either use it to attack your opponent, activate your abilities, or instead you can use it to gather essence, which you can collect throughout the game, and evolve your creatures into more powerful creatures. And I think we can see that this theme here is inspired by things like Pokemon or Digimon, but this is definitely its own game. The design here is completely different than the card games that either of those offer. And this does look like a really fun game with its own unique twist, and the best thing about it is that it's not pay to win, so you don't have to shell out tons and tons of money buying booster packs trying to beat your opponent's Charizard, or trying to buy a Charizard for yourself for $420,000. It's a first edition. And launching on April 26th, we have Uprising Titans of the First Age, and this is an expansion to the game Uprising that plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 100 to 240 minutes to play. And I'm just going to jump straight to the chase here and let you all know right now that this one is easily my personal pick of the week. And I'll get into the reasons why in a second, but first I'll just let you know how the core game plays. And this is a game where players are working cooperatively against the game. There's 2 different factions that players are going to be fighting against, and those factions can also occasionally fight against each other as well. But players are controlling their own faction, each with their own asymmetric abilities. And each faction actually has 2 different leaders that play a little bit differently, and you're only going to choose one of those to play in a given game. So you can actually play the same faction again and use a different leader, and it'll be completely different. But every player is going to have their own unique faction deck, and you're going to be using those faction cards to upgrade your abilities and your faction as the game goes forward. The cool thing here is that you won't actually be able to unlock all these cards in a single game, so you're going to have a few choices as the game moves forward, where you're going to be deciding which cards that you want to unlock and which cards that you want to chain together with the ones that you've already unlocked, and which ones will give you the best opportunity depending on the way that the game has played so far. But that's not the only way that your faction is unique, because you're also going to have a unique player board with different types of units, and the different types of units have different costs in order to deploy those units, but then they can also roll different subsets of dice, and the different dice in this game have a few different icons on them and different probabilities that you will roll those icons, and they are distinguished by their individual colors. So depending on the types of enemies you're going up against, how much risk you want to take, and how much resources you're willing to spend, that's going to all play into which types of units you deploy and which types of dice that you're going to be able to roll when you engage in combat. And I really love the way that the enemies work in this game. They all have their own special abilities and different activations that can trigger at different points in the game or when they're revealed. But then they all share this really interesting mechanism called their threat. And different events will cause that threat to increase the longer that they're out on the board. And the higher that their threat is, the more dice they're going to be able to roll and the harder they're going to be able to fight against. The cool thing here is that the threat is also related to their health, so every time that you inflict damage on them, it's going to lower their threat level, lowering the amount of dice that they're able to roll. But to actually engage with these different enemies, they're going to have to be deployed out on the board along with your characters, and you're going to have to end up on the same hex, and that's going to trigger a battle. And players will be moving around the board, exploring these different hexes, building different buildings there in order to generate resources, and deal with different events and opportunities that can occur anytime that you explore a new tile. Players can also attempt to complete different quest cards, which usually give you some different bonuses like resources, victory points, or special actions. And each quest normally has multiple requirements that players can attempt to meet. And if you complete a subset of those, you will complete the quest. But depending on the subset that you complete, or if you complete all of them, it will change what you get as a reward. And those rewards can even stack depending on how many of those requirements you completed. But it's not all fun and games, because failing a quest also has its repercussions. Everything I just said to you is a ton of fun, and it's part of the reason that this one is my pick of the week, but this game actually has quite a lot going on in it, and normally I'm not usually a fan of games that have too much going on in it, but I wouldn't really say that this one has too much, because the polish that this game has, and the iconography, and the rulebook, and the index, everything that has been put into this game was done in such a great way that makes it very streamlined and really easy to play. And even though there's a lot that can go on in this game, it doesn't really feel like it, because everything just flows and is really intuitive, and that polish really brings it all together. And the game plays over a series of rounds, and you can play less rounds if you want a shorter game. But at the start of each round, players are going to be flipping these event cards, and that's going to have an effect that normally affects everyone. And it'll also have a bit of a story on it that will build a little story arc throughout the game. And some of them even have different options for players to make a decision. But it's super easy to follow through the sequence of this game, because there's a chapter track on the side of the board, and you're going to be moving a little token there to tell you where you are in the round. And that's going to walk you through every phase of the round, giving you almost all the information information you need in order to play the game. This is a game that definitely had quite a lot of playtesting, quite a lot of blind playtesting, and quite a lot of iterations on its rulebook, because this is probably the most polished game that I've ever played. But like all games, this isn't necessarily for everyone. This is a long game to play. It does have the option of playing fewer rounds if you want to shorten it, but it's going to be a long game if you want to play the entire thing, especially in your first few times playing it. And another complaint that I have heard about this game is that the dice rolling can be a little bit swingy, where sometimes you have some great rolls and sometimes you have some not so great rolls. And if you have a lot of not so great rolls in a single game, well, that isn't always fun for everyone. I personally don't have that complaint because I think the game gives you enough control in deciding which units to put out on the board and in turn which dice you're going to be rolling, and then you always have the decision of when and which battles you go into. So I really just see it as a mechanism of how much you want to push your luck. And there's also all sorts of items and abilities that you can gain to prep for a battle and give yourself some better odds. For whatever my preferences are, it strikes that sweet spot of having enough randomness to keep the dice rolling exciting, but then it gives me enough strategy and options in order to mitigate those odds and try to put myself in the best position. It doesn't always work out, but to me that's part of the fun. But I think if you consistently play that way, you will eventually win this game. Just don't ask me if I've won it yet. But every time I have played it, I did feel like I could have won. And I have never once played this on the normal mode. I always played it on a slightly harder difficulty, which next time I will be definitely playing it on the normal mode, and I definitely recommend that for your first play. I have a habit of always jumping into the games on the hardest mode possible because normally the hard is never really that hard. This one's hard. But if you are particularly sensitive to dice rolling, or if you're not a fan of that push your luck mechanism, this expansion might actually provide a few options to tip the scales in your favor, because this campaign is going to be adding a few different modules that you can mix into the game, and a few of them will make the game a little bit easier and also allow you to have more consistency in your rolls. And the main module that will allow you to do that is the Ether module, and this is going to allow for a new resource that all players will generate, but then it's a shared pool of resources that can be split between players however they see fit, and you can spend those ether tokens in order to re-roll your dice if you had a particularly bad roll. Of course, these aren't unlimited, so it doesn't completely break the game and make it super easy. You're still going to have a challenge, plus there are some modules in this that make the game harder. So if you want to balance it back out while still adding this module, that's also an option. And the next module is the Mercenaries module, and this actually adds 13 different elite units that are not tied to a particular faction, and any faction can hire these into their army. Each of them also has their own unique special ability and their own dice type, and some of them even make use of 3 new dice types, which are bronze, silver, and gold, and these are more powerful dice which will have more consistent rolls than some of the other options, which is another way that will make the game a little bit easier. But enough about making the game easier, because I want pain, and there is a module for that, and that is the 26 new Nemesis tokens, and these are going to be special abilities that are actually granted to the enemies, and anytime there is a group of enemies out on the board, you're going to be adding one of these tokens to that group of enemies, and it's going to be giving them a special ability and making them more challenging when you engage in battle. And there's also 2 brand new unique factions added to the game. First, there's the pirates that instead of building havens, they actually have pirate ships. And they also gain extra mercenaries as starting units, which can add a little bit of variability to the units that they have from game to game. And then there is the Titans of the First Age faction, and this one's really interesting because it actually plays a little bit like the enemy factions, but this one is not an enemy. This is a player-controlled faction, which means it's a good faction, but it is going to have a sort of threat meter, and as that threat meter increases, it's going to change the abilities and strength that you have in battle. I'm super excited about all these changes, but it doesn't stop there, because there's going to be brand new items, events, quests, and location tiles, and there's also going to be upgraded components for all the components that were previously in cardboard. Und das Spiel wird auch auf Deutsch angeboten. And the game will also be offered in German. And if you are even mildly interested in this one, you'll definitely want to follow along for the free gift, because it gets you a dice tray. And this is the type of a game that you really do want a dice tray. I actually bought dice trays specifically for this game. That's how much I like it. I have the extra dice pack as well. I don't really have a problem with rolling the dice, but just passing dice around the table is just so much easier with a dice tray. And of course, if you want to learn more or check this campaign out, I have links in the description below. And the next campaign we have is another really exciting one, also launching on April 26th, and this one is called Wayfarers of the South Tigris. And not only do I think this one looks amazing, but also everyone over on the Shelf Clutter Discord does, because this one is our Discord pick of the week. And this one is coming from Garfield Games, continuing the series of the West Kingdom and the North Seas, which I believe 3 of those are in the top 100 on BGG, which is a really impressive feat. And this one really does look like it's bringing in some fresh new ideas, and it looks like a game that I would really enjoy because it has dice worker placement, which is one of my favorite mechanisms, as well as tableau building, which is another favorite of mine, and worker placement, which is always great. And this game takes place back in 8020 AD, and players are characters exploring the land, waterways, and the stars above. The main board's made up of 3 different sections, each double-sided, so you can flip the different sections and mix it up however you want, so that each game does play a little bit differently than the last, and there's going to be a few different paths for players to explore. But then there's essentially 4 different decks that are spread around the board. There's the townsfolk on the top left, and then there's the space deck on the top right, then there's the land deck in the bottom left, and the sea deck on the bottom right. Players are going to be gaining these cards through different actions and adding them to a tableau surrounding their starting player board, which you can see in the top center here, with the land cards restricted to the bottom left, the sea cards restricted to the bottom right, and then space cards always have to be put on top of a land or a sea card. Each of these cards behave a little bit differently with your land and sea cards, improving your actions and the engine that you're building throughout the game. And the sea cards do also interconnect with each other and can trigger some different abilities when you go to add a new card, depending on how they pair together. The space cards are going to add more opportunities for victory points at the end of the game. And the townsfolk cards are actually here, even though you can't really see them, because they're actually slid in behind the land and sea cards, because those townsfolk cards are actually used to upgrade those cards and improve the abilities that they grant you. And there is actually a 5th type of card called the inspiration card, and that can actually be used to upgrade the victory point potential of your space cards. And the way that this game works is that players are going to be taking turns, and on your turn you can take one of 3 possible actions. And the first action is to place one of your workers out on the main board, and the way that you're going to do that is you're going to be putting it on one of the cards surrounding the board, and then also resolving the action on the board that is connected to that card. And all these different icons will represent different actions, and there's all sorts of actions that can allow you to do different things in the game, like gain cards, gain resources, gain more workers, gain influence, which you can apply to these different areas of study on the right hand side, and you can spend that in turn for additional actions on future turns. But anything that you can do in this game, you can expect it to be found as a possible action in some of these areas on the board and on your cards. And one of those possible actions is actually a pretty special one called the journal action, because that's going to allow you to move your colored token through these ink blotches from left to right, resolving any of the actions or abilities that you move through as you go through the board. But the second action you can do on your turn is, instead of placing one of your workers out on the board, you can instead place a die onto one of your tableau cards. But in order to do that, each of these cards is going to have a little icon on it, whether it's a telescope, a camel, a bird, or even a boat. And in order to place a die there, it's going to have the right value associated with that icon. And that's where your main player board comes into play, because you have the different valued dice in a row at the top here, and then beneath them you have all sorts of different icons, and each of those icons below that die is going to be associated with that die, and they can do different things like allow you to put the die on those cards with those icons, or the icons themselves can give you some sorts of benefits. But this area here represents your caravan, and you're going to get different actions throughout the game that are going to allow you to gain tiles, and then you can put those tiles onto your caravan however you see fit, as long as it fits there. And that's going to upgrade your dice, opening up new opportunities and new possibilities for dice placement. And I already love dice worker placement, but when you get upgradable dice worker placement, this is definitely getting my attention. And then finally, the third option you have on your turn is to perform the rest action, and that's going to bring all the dice and workers back to your main player board from wherever you distributed them. But then it's also going to trigger any of the cards that you have in your tableau that get triggered on your rest action. So you can actually get some bonuses for doing this. And the game continues to play like this until the end of the game, where players are going to score their victory points, and you're going to gain victory points from a few different areas. First, you're going to get victory points from any cards that just grant you victory points. Then there also is a set collection aspect to the game, because the cards also have different icons, and if you collect certain sets of icons, those can also earn you victory points. Then you'll also gain victory points from your space cards, but then you'll also gain victory points if you have the most influence in any of these 3 areas of study on the right-hand side of the board. The player with the most victory points wins the game, and of course you can find links to this campaign and get notified on launch in the description below. And the next campaign we have, also launching on the 26th, is called Extravaganza, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play. And this is one that I had a lot of fun learning about, because it has a really fun theme and something that I haven't ever seen before in board games, because in this game you are playing as drag queens and you are competing in a lip sync dance battle against your opponents. The game also has some really neat mechanisms to it, which I'll get into in a second, but at the start of the game, players are going to be putting their characters out on the main stage, and the entire stage is always going to be bedazzled with these different gems, and players can perform a number of optional actions on their turn, and the first one is to move, and I really like how this is implemented because players can move in any direction, even diagonally, as many spaces as they want, and players will collect any gem they land on, but then you're also going to collect any of the gems that you pass through that also match the color of the gem that you landed on. So let's say that your character was standing on this purple heart here. If you were to move in a straight line and end on this green token, you would gain that green token, but you would also gain the 2 green tokens that you pass through because they match that color. I just think that's a really neat puzzle where players are going to be trying to get as many tokens as they can, but then also trying to set them up for their next turn and trying to end in a spot that puts them in the best position to get the most tokens every time they get to take this action. And the next action players can take is to take one of the cards from the display, which is going to be showing a few different cards, and they're going to be of a few different colors, and you can just take whichever card you want into your hand. But if there are other cards in display that match the color of the card that you took, then you're going to gain lip tokens equal to the number of cards of that color. And this brings me to the next action, which is the dance action, where players can actually play these cards by spending the gems that they've collected in order to activate them, and that will score you victory points and move you up the victory point track. And this brings us to the final action that you can take, and this is your lip sync action. And this is where you're going to be spending those lip tokens to claim different lyrics of a song. And the way that you claim lyrics is that there's a whole bunch of lyric tokens that are going to be randomly put out on the board at the start of the game. And those are going to be taken from left to right until all of those tokens are taken, depending on player count. And collecting those lyric tokens and combining them with your dance action is going to increase the amount of point potential that you can gain. But to gain those tokens, you're going to have to spend those lip tokens that you gained earlier, and you're going to want to make sure that you're spending those on the right lyrics because you can chain together lyrics of the same color, and the different lyrics do come at a different cost and can offer different scoring potentials. You're going to be earning victory points anytime you complete those dance moves or claim those lyrics, so you're going to want to do your best to do both of those as much as possible, and the player that wins the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. The next campaign we have launches on April 26th, and this one's called Grab Your Breakfast, and this plays 2 to 4 players. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes to play, and this is a set collection game where players are going to be trying to match cards with their hand with cards out in a tableau in order to collect those cards and earn the victory points associated with them. Players are going to be starting the game by shuffling up all those tile cards and putting them out in that 5x5 grid in stacks of 2. After that, players are each going to get dealt out 2 hand cards. The cards on the tableau will have an image on them, but then they're also going to specify which other cards they can pair with in order to earn you some amount of victory points. The cards in your hand will look very similar to these because they'll share the same images, but they won't have any scoring potential defined on them. And the way the game works is pretty easy. Players are going to be taking turns discarding a card in their hand in order to pick up a card from the tableau that matches the image of the card that they discarded. The only catch here is that you can only take cards from the left and the right side of the tableau. So you're always going to be picking away from one side or the other, taking those cards into your hand until the tableau shrinks down more and more, until all the cards are taken. But don't forget that these cards are in stacks of 2, which means that you're going to have to take 2 cards from each spot before you're able to move inwards towards the center of the tableau. Players will be collecting these cards, trying to create the best combos that they can in order to score the most victory points, and once all those cards are gone, the player with the most victory points wins the game. And the next campaign launching on April 26th is Through Ice and Snow, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a Euro game where players are leading expeditions to the Arctic in order to document new species of animals, charter treacherous lands, and discover the elusive Northwest Passage. Players are going to be in charge of their own ship, and their crew is going to include 3 different worker types that you're going to be issuing out on the board. And the 3 worker types are the Carpenter, which can provide different improvements and structures to the player, the Scientist, which can provide inventions and research, and then the Captain, which provides leadership and organization. And not only does the game utilize worker placement and resource management like a lot of Euros, but this one also incorporates survival into the mix because players will not only be focusing on the exploration, but they're also going to have to manage their food, their crew, their morale, and the condition of their ship. And there's going to be some tough decisions deciding what kind of leader you want to be when you have the health of your crew at risk, but then you're also trying to gain prestige in your overall expedition. Luckily, players can also recruit Inuit guides who are experts in finding fuel, piloting sleds, and navigating vital hunting parties. In terms of the theme, this one kind of reminds me of Darwin's Journey or Encyclopedia that was just recently released, but with a touch of more danger, which is something that I'm really interested theme-wise. I'd like to learn a lot more about how this one plays, so if you're also interested in this one, definitely check it out. I have links in the description below, and you can find out more when this campaign launches. Also launching on April 26th, we have Fliptown, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 45 minutes to play. And this is a flip and write game that makes really clever use of a poker deck, and I believe this one was designed as a solo game first. Don't quote me on that, but if you are interested in solo games and you are interested in flip and write games or roll and write games, I think this is definitely an interesting mix of the two that you'll definitely want to check out. And there's 2 modes to play this game. You can either try to go for the highest score, or instead you can add one of these cowbots to your game, which will add a win and loss condition, and you'll have to meet one of those criteria to either win or lose the game. And players will be using a dry erase board in order to track their progress throughout the game, and the game plays over 3 rounds, each with 5 turns, and at the start of the round you're going to be shuffling this deck of poker cards, and then you're going to be drawing 1 card face down, which is going to represent the sheriff card, which you won't look at until the end of the round. Then you're going to be drawing 3 more cards and putting them face up in front of you, and you're going to decide which is going to be your suit card, your value card, and your poker card. And the difference between those is that the suit card is going to dictate where you're going to go onto the board. Your value card is going to be what gives you the different options at that location. And the poker card is a card that you're going to save to try and have the best poker hand possible at the end of your 5 turns. And the first location you can visit is the trail, which is just a straight line of different bonuses. And your value card is going to dictate how far you move down the trail, and then you're going to gain that resource, but you're going to be skipping anything that you moved over. So you just want to make sure that you're not skipping over things that you really want. The Badland is going to allow players to perform different robberies and gain resources, but this is also going to gain you wanted levels, which I will come back to later. At the mine location, players will always be starting at the mine door, and then you're going to be moving down different mine shafts, choosing one side or the other in a sort of binary search tree, and then choosing the direction you want to go, and then gaining those resources that are associated with that location. And I just remembered that I'm on a computer and I can actually zoom into things, so here is a better view. And the next location is the town location. This is going to have all sorts of different buildings that you can visit, and the value card is going to dictate which of the buildings that you are visiting, and they're all going to have kind of a different action or a different ability that's going to get activated. So this one has the most variety, and these might be different modifiers or upgrades or just straight up resources or converting resources into other resources. And then the final location you can visit is the cemetery, and this is where you can go to do some grave robbing, and it doesn't matter which suit or value you have when you visit this location. You can just use it anytime. So it's kind of a free location if none of your other options are really that great. And of course, grave robbing is not really a nice thing to do. I don't really recommend it, and it will earn you some wanted levels. And you're going to repeat this turn structure, drawing the different cards and deciding how you want to play them, and then performing your different actions. And a lot of these different locations do trigger actions that can send you off to another location on the board, causing a sort of chain reaction effect. But the end of your 5th turn will trigger the end of the round, and then at that point you'll have a full hand of 5 cards from your poker cards, and then you'll gain bonuses depending on how good your poker hand is. But then you'll also have to reveal the sheriff card that you drew at the start of the round. And the way that that works is if the value of your wanted level is higher than the value of the sheriff's card, then you're going to have to pay a fine. So as your wanted level goes higher and higher, the more likely it is that you're going to get busted by the sheriff. Before you do reveal the card though, you do always have the option to bribe the sheriff and then not flip the card. So it's up to you to weigh that risk and reward and decide how much gambling you really want to do. But if you are particularly good at gambling, mining, grave robbing, you might just get the most victory points in the game, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. And of course, if you are interested, you can click that notify me button, which you can find a link to in the description below. And the next couple campaigns we have are launching on April 27th, and the first one we have is called Oranienburger Kanal. And this plays 1 to 2 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And this one did sneak up on me a little bit because I did not realize that there was a campaign launching from Uwe Rosenberg. And he is someone that's created some of the best board games out there, pioneering some of the different ideas that we now see in a lot of different Euro games. He seems to go through phases of creating similar games, and more recently he did a lot of polyomino designs, and this one is not going to be a polyomino design, so this is a brand new style that he is exploring. This one is a Euro game, and it does use action selection, and players will be trying to build and plan their own industrial facility, and they're going to be using actions to build paths, roads, bridges, and railways, with the end goal to try and earn the most prestige and win the game. The players will not only be building different paths and roadways, but they will also be building different structures. And as you add different paths and connect to those different structures, you're going to trigger the effects of those structures, which can generate you some different proceeds or resources that will help you further in the game. And one of the things that seems to make this game unique is this resource wheel. And the way that this works is you basically have these 2 arms on the wheel, and then on different areas of the wheel, you're going to have different resources that you're able to collect. But if you look really, really closely into the center of that wheel, you'll notice that there are some numbers there. And the way that this wheel works is that players will be able to turn these arms at different points in the game, and that's going to change where those numbers line up with the different sections of the overall wheel. And depending on which resources you have in those different sections, where they line up with those numbers is going to represent how much of that resource you are able to generate. I don't completely understand it, but it sounds interesting and I really want to learn more. I don't have too much more info on this one, but I did try to read the rulebook at 1 a.m., which didn't go so well, but the rulebook is posted on BGG under the files section, so if you want to see more on this one for yourself, you can definitely go ahead and check that out. Otherwise, you can check out the link down below and get notified on its launch, and I'm sure there will be a lot more content added to this page once this launches, with some better videos outlining exactly how the gameplay works. And the next campaign we have launching on the 27th is Damask, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. And a damask is a patterned fabric woven from silk, if you're unfamiliar with it, like I was. But this is a drafting and pattern building game where players are each going to have their own player shield. But then there's going to be a shared wheel in the center of the board that represents a spinning wheel of silk of different color types. And the whole goal here is to try and collect these different pattern damask cards, matching the different patterns and colors with the one that you got previously. And you're going to be scoring points based on the matching colors and patterns of the damasks that you're able to collect. And on a player's turn, you just have to perform one of 2 possible actions, but then there's also 2 optional actions that you can take after that. And the first action is to simply take one of the damask cards from the shared display, and the card will say on one side which colored cubes you need to collect in order to complete that damask, but otherwise it's just going to go into your own personal play area. And the second action you can take is to take cubes from the silk wheel, and this has a really interesting mechanism because you can take any cube you want, but then you're going to take all the cubes to the left or to the right of that cube until you pick up 2 cubes of the same color. So if you were to start at this red cube and then move counterclockwise, you would pick up the red cube, then you would gain the yellow one, the black one, and then the pink one, but then you would pick up a second pink one, and that would trigger the end of collecting the cubes. For each cube that you collected, you're going to be rotating the wheel that many spokes, and any time that the arm on the wheel passes one of these special action tokens, that's going to trigger that action and affect all players. Any cubes that you can actually use to complete a damask will go onto your damask card, but if you don't have a matching location for that, then it's going to go on your overflow card. And the reason that that's important is because one of the optional actions is to take the overstock cubes from another player. But the catch here is that you can only take a single color, so you can choose any other opponent and take all of the same color from their overflow card. And that's not completely terrible for your opponent because they're also going to get a faction favor token, and these can be gained in a few different ways throughout the game, and they're going to have some special bonus actions that they can spend for later, or they can also be traded for victory points. And the second optional action is that if you did gain all the cubes to complete that damask, then you can mount that damask into your player stand. This will gain you points based on how it matches with the damask that you placed before, and the game continues like this until the end of the game, and the player with the most victory points at the end wins. And if you are interested in this one, make sure to subscribe to get notified because it will get you a small micro expansion. And those are all the campaigns I have for you this week. Quite a lot of games to cover, and I'm actually kind of surprised none of these campaigns I covered it in the past, because it seems like every week a game's getting pushed off and I'm covering it again. So that's kind of nice to have a video that's just completely brand new, 100% fresh footage. But of course, this video wouldn't be complete without some sort of giveaway at the end, and I do have an awesome one for you this week, and that is for Explorers of the Woodlands. And you can go ahead and check this one out on Kickstarter right now. But this is a cooperative adventure and exploration board game where players are going to be shuffling a stack of location tiles, but then you're going to be shuffling a boss tile into the lower portion of the stack. Players are going to be drawing tiles from that stack to build out the map by putting those tiles in different locations where they're able to fit on the main board. And then each of those location cards will have different icons on them that can spawn different things like enemies, traps, or treasure chests. Players will each have their own player board with a unique character and stats, and players will be rolling dice on their turn and then allocating those dice to the different areas on their board to perform different actions depending on the value of those dice. This will allow players to do different things like move around the board, boost their attack or defense for the next battle, or gain different resources. When players discover monsters, they can choose to attack them, and they can do this by using their separate attack dice that they can augment in different ways and use different items. And monsters can have different strengths and weaknesses and different rewards for the players being able to defeat them. The game continues until the final boss location is discovered, and then players will be working together to try and defeat that boss. And this will be the most challenging part of the game, because not only is the boss stronger than all the other enemies, but it also has a bunch of different special abilities, and players will be rolling a die for each turn that they interact with the boss, and that's going to trigger one of their abilities and put it into effect. If players can defeat the boss, then they win the game. And this giveaway is going to be for the Explorers of the Woodlands pledge, and this comes with the core game and all unlocked stretch goals. And to enter this giveaway, just leave a comment down below with the hashtag Woodlands and let us know of a forest or campgrounds or trail near you that if we were to visit your location, we should definitely check out. I live in southern Ontario, and it's a few hours drive to Algonquin Park, but it is a beautiful place to be. Northern Ontario is definitely worth the drive. There's all sorts of neat rock formations, vegetation, and the water there is crystal clear. It's still really cold. I actually just did some portage camping there just before COVID hit a couple of years ago, and it was a ton of fun, and I'm really looking forward to being able to do that sort of stuff again. This video was a lot of work. I'm not complaining, but I'm going to bed. Until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.